Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, wonderful to have you here, and appreciate the time that we had yesterday in my office as well, talking about a number of these issues. During this hearing, a number of folks have referenced the Inspector General's report about what's been happening in Afghanistan, and I want to just highlight some of those findings that I find particularly striking and then ask a question. But as others have mentioned, since 2001, 2,247 U.S. military personnel have died, 20,000 have been wounded. Adjusted for inflation, the U.S. has spent more on Afghanistan's reconstruction than it did on the Marshall Plan to rebuild Western Europe after World War II. Reconstructing Afghanistan has now become the largest expenditure to rebuild a single country in our nation's history. The Afghan security forces are not capable of providing security for the whole country. The Afghan government cannot sustain many of the investments that the U.S. taxpayers have made in the country. And despite a U.S. investment of $8.5 billion in counter-narcotics, Afghan opium production is now at an all-time high. Despite $70 billion in U.S. investment in Afghan security forces, only 63% of the country is under government control. Corruption continues to erode legitimacy, limiting effectiveness, bolstering support for the opposing insurgency. And after 15 years, Afghanistan still cannot support itself financially or functionally, and long-term financial assistance will be required if the country is to survive. Not a good record after 15 years of involvement in Afghanistan, and after what I've heard today and what we talked about yesterday, it's becoming even more complicated with the Russian involvement, Chinese involvement in natural resources, and the list goes on. If you could just say and what I've heard is a lot of what I've heard over the last 15 years of what the United States will be doing in Afghanistan. What are we going to do that's different, that has not been done in 15 years, given this, I think, pretty damaging report about what's happened over the last 15 years?
Thank you, Senator, and I appreciate the reviewing this and the chance to talk about President Ghani's plan for the way ahead. So one of the and I acknowledge and again express our appreciation for the great support from this body to sustain this effort. Our number one objective has been to protect the homeland, and we have not had another attack on the homeland from Afghanistan in the 15 years that we have been there. So I'd say that's point number one. As I mentioned before, so I acknowledge fully the significant sunk cost that we have made in Afghanistan. I would mention that we now are at about 10% of what we once were in terms of troop commitment, and have reduced those other expenditures significantly. Yes, the problems persist, and I don't want to in any way minimize those. What we have with President Ghani is a partner who is willing to boldly go after these problems, and this is significant. And I offered the example of the ghost soldiers. This was something that he was willing to do that previously we had not been able to do. I also want to share the plans we are working with the Afghan government, which President Ghani calls the ANDSF roadmap, 4-year roadmap. After the Warsaw Summit this summer in July of 16, when the Allies granted 4 more years of commitment to Afghanistan, President Ghani sat down with his team and us to say, how are we going to achieve success in the next 4 years? We're working on that plan now. This plan involves expanding the amount of control that the government has over the population. I should point out that this investment that we have made has resulted in a Afghan population who universally, well, almost universally, 87% reject the Taliban. They do not want to return to the Taliban. 3/4 of the population have great confidence in their security forces. So this is a population and a government who want to work with us and need our support. Geostrategically, it's a critically important region of the world. This is a tough neighborhood. Iran, Pakistan, China, Central Asia. Once removed, you have other conflict zones. We have a partner in Afghanistan, a moderate Islamic republic, that wants to partner with us against terrorism. We have a population who reject terrorism, and we have a ability to have a counterterrorism platform in a critically important part of the world. So success going forward, we believe, means helping the Afghans to achieve this greater population control. That then will enable us to have the enduring counterterrorism platform to help to continue to protect our homeland and those of our allies. We also see if we can get to a place of reconciliation, that we then bring a degree of stability to this critical region that will benefit the entire neighborhood, to include India, China, everyone. So in my initial conversations with my new chain of command, we have touched upon all of these areas. So your concerns and the concerns of this committee are at the top of the list as we discuss this going forward on how we can achieve success in Afghanistan going forward to protect our national interests along the lines I just outlined.
Thank you, General.